My cute neighbor took me to her family barbecue, and then, in front of her entire family, she introduced me as her boyfriend without warning. But I had never once held her hand, never taken her on a date, never been anything to her but the quiet man who lived next door. I was standing in the backyard of a house I'd never entered, holding a plate of ribs, when the woman who waved at me every morning across our shared fence turned to her father and said, "Daddy, this is the boyfriend I've been telling you about." I almost dropped the plate. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Her father's face broke into a smile so wide it made my chest ache, and I had 3 seconds to decide. Blow up her lie in front of everyone she loved, or play along. My name is Ethan. I'm 34. Divorced 2 years now, the kind of man my ex-wife once described in a single, quiet, devastating sentence. She said living with me was like living with furniture. Present. Functional. Never in the way, never in the room either. I didn't argue with her. I never do. Some men raise their voices when they're hurting. I go quiet. Quiet like a house with the lights off. After the divorce, I moved into a small rental with a porch too narrow for 2 chairs, and a fence line that separated my yard from hers. That's how I met her. Not through a conversation, through a fence. Her name was Claire. She lived next door with a garden that smelled like rosemary and cut grass, and every morning at exactly 7:15, she'd step outside in an old flannel shirt, coffee mug in hand, and lift her hand in a small wave across the fence before I even opened my door. She never waited for me to wave first. She just did it every single day like it was already decided between us that this was ours. I looked forward to that wave more than I looked forward to anything else in my life. I never told anyone that. I barely admitted it to myself. Then, about 8 months ago, something changed. Every Saturday morning, I'd open my front door to grab the newspaper, and there would be something sitting on my porch railing. A jar of homemade jam. A loaf of bread still warm enough to fog the plastic wrap. A small potted herb with a folded note that just said, "Thought you could use some greenery." No name, no signature, nothing. I knew it was her. Nobody else in that neighborhood baked bread that smelled like cinnamon and rain. I never once asked her why. I told myself it was neighborly kindness, nothing more. But I counted every single one. 34 Saturdays. 34 small, quiet gifts left by a woman who barely said more than good morning to me. And every single time, I stood on my porch holding whatever she'd left, asking myself the same question I never had the courage to ask her face to face. Why me? Then, 3 days before that barbecue, she knocked on my door for the first time in 8 months of living beside each other. Not a wave, an actual knock. She stood there in the doorway wearing a soft green sweater, her hair pulled back, looking somehow more nervous than I'd ever seen her. She said her family was hosting a barbecue that weekend, and her father's knee had been giving him trouble, and her brother was working a double shift, and they needed an extra pair of hands to help set up chairs and tables. Would I mind coming? I said sure. Just like that. No hesitation, no second thought. I didn't stop to wonder why, out of everyone she could have asked, she was standing on my porch asking me. The drive to her parents' house took 20 minutes down a road lined with old oak trees, their branches hanging so low they nearly brushed the roof of my car. The house itself sat at the end of a gravel driveway, white paint peeling gently at the corners, a porch with 2 rocking chairs that looked like they'd witnessed 30 years of Sunday dinners. Smoke curled up from a grill in the backyard, carrying the smell of charcoal and something sweet, maybe brown sugar, maybe honey. String lights hung between the trees, waiting for the sun to go down. Claire's father met me at the gate. A broad, weathered man in his 60s, with hands like they'd built half the house themselves. He looked at me the way fathers look at men they're quietly measuring, deciding in the first few seconds whether you're worth the trust they haven't given you yet. Then his face softened, and he pulled me into a handshake that turned into something close to a hug. "Claire's told us so much about you," he said. I nearly choked on the words before they even reached me. Told them so much about me? In 8 months of living next door to her, she'd never said more than a dozen sentences to me in total. And yet here was her father, treating me like I'd been part of this family's Sunday dinners for years. I helped carry folding tables across the yard. I stacked chairs beside the porch. I laughed at stories about Claire as a little girl, chasing fireflies barefoot in this very yard. Stories told by aunts and uncles I had never met but who somehow already knew my name. And then Claire walked out through the screen door, crossed the yard toward me with an ease that startled me, slid her arm through mine like she'd rehearsed the motion 1,000 times in her head, and turned to her father with words that stopped my heart in my chest. "Daddy, this is the boyfriend I've been telling you about." The plate in my hands tilted. 20 faces turned toward me at once. And somewhere behind that porch light, I caught Claire's eyes locked onto mine, and in them I read something she could never have said out loud in front of her whole family. "Please, don't correct me. Not here. Not now." I gave one small nod. That was all it took. For the rest of the evening, I became Claire's boyfriend in front of people who loved her more than anything on earth. I sat beside her at the long table under the string lights. I let her lean her shoulder against mine when the conversation slowed into that lazy, comfortable rhythm only families have. Aunts and uncles asked the usual questions. "What do you do? Where did you two meet? How long have you been together?" Claire answered every single one without missing a beat, like she'd rehearsed this exact moment 100 times in the mirror. 8 months, she said. Exactly as long as she'd lived next door to me. And that's when something cold and strange settled into my chest. Every detail she gave her family was true. Every single one. The only thing she changed was one word. Neighbor became boyfriend. The rest was just our real life, tilted a few degrees toward a future that hadn't happened yet. Before I go further into what happened that night, I need to ask you something, because if you've made it this far, you already care about how this ends. My ex-wife once told me I'd never build anything people would care about. She said it the week she left, standing in the doorway with her suitcase already in the car. She said I'd never make it to 50,000 people who'd actually want to hear what I have to say. I didn't argue with her that day either. I just quietly promised myself I would. So if this story is pulling at something in you right now, if you want to see me prove her wrong, hit subscribe and turn on that notification bell before we go back into that backyard. Every single one of you watching this is part of that 50,000. Let's get there together. Now, back to the yard, back to the string lights, back to the family who thought I belonged to their daughter. A man walked through the gate late, still in his work clothes, boots dusty, jaw set hard. Claire's brother, Marcus. He looked me up and down without offering his hand, the way a man sizes up something he hasn't decided is safe yet. "So you're the one Claire won't stop mentioning," he said flatly. That single sentence did two things at once. It told me Claire had been talking about me for months behind closed doors, and it warned me that Marcus hadn't yet decided whether I deserved that. After the barbecue wound down, after the last plate was cleared and the aunts had hugged me goodbye like I was already family, Claire and I sat in my car in her parents' driveway. The porch light dimmed behind us. The string lights swayed in the breeze above the yard, throwing soft, shifting patterns across the hood of the car. The air still smelled like charcoal smoke and cut grass, and for 3 full minutes, Claire said nothing at all. I watched the clock on my dashboard move from 9:14 to 9:17, and I held my breath more times than I could count. Then she finally spoke, and her voice was flat, worn smooth like a stone that had been turned over in someone's pocket for a very long time. "My dad's knee isn't the only thing that's wrong," she said. "He has a heart condition. Congestive heart failure. The doctors gave him a timeline, Ethan. They gave my whole family a countdown, and nobody talks about it because if we say it out loud, it becomes real." She stared straight ahead through the windshield at the dark road, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "He told my mother there's only one thing he wants before things get worse. He wants to see me settled, happy, with someone he trusts before he runs out of time to trust anyone at all." She turned to look at me then, and her eyes were dry, but there was something behind them that looked like it had been crying for months without ever once letting a single tear fall. I couldn't bring just anyone into that house and lie to my father's face. I needed someone I actually trusted enough to stand next to. Someone who wouldn't turn this into something ugly. She paused. "You were the only person I could think of." I didn't say anything. I didn't reach for her hand, and she didn't reach for mine. We just sat there in the dark, Two people who had somehow built an entire fake relationship out of nothing but 8 months of silent Saturday mornings and a fence between two backyards. When I finally drove home that night, I walked into my kitchen and stood there under the flickering light, staring at the loaf of bread she'd left me 3 days earlier, now going stale on my counter. And for the first time since my divorce, I felt something crack open inside my chest that I thought had sealed shut for good. I wasn't angry that she'd used me. I wasn't even confused anymore about why she'd chosen me out of everyone she knew. I was terrified, because somewhere between carrying folding chairs across that yard and hearing her father call me son before I'd even earned it, I realized I didn't want this to be pretend anymore, and that terrified me more than any lie ever could. I agreed to keep going, not because she asked me to, but because some part of me had already stopped pretending this was only about her father. Every Saturday after that, I found myself crossing that fence line for real, instead of just waiting for what she'd leave on my porch. I helped her father repair the loose boards on his back steps, my hands blistering next to his while he told me stories about building that house with his own father 30 years earlier. I sat with Claire's mother on the porch some evenings, listening to her talk about the early days of her marriage, back when she and Claire's father had nothing but a rented apartment and a second-hand truck. Claire and I were honest with each other about the boundaries. This was still a performance, we told ourselves. Something we were doing for her father's sake. Nothing more. No promises, no confusion. Just two people protecting a family from a truth too heavy to say out loud. But every Saturday, that boundary got a little thinner. Her fingers brushed mine when she passed me a plate, and she let it linger half a second longer than she needed to. She laughed at something I said in a way I never heard her laugh with anyone else, quieter, warmer, her eyes closing just slightly like the sound belonged only to the two of us. I found myself checking the clock on Friday afternoons, counting down the hours until I could see her again, inside a lie that had somehow started to feel more honest than my entire marriage ever had. Then, one evening, everything nearly broke apart. Marcus showed up at my door without calling first. He stood on my porch with his arms crossed, jaw tight, the same look he'd worn the night we met. "I need you to be straight with me," he said. "Do you actually care about my sister? Or is this just pity because of my dad? Because if it's pity, I need to know now. Not after she gets hurt." I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because the truth that rose up in me arrived with a certainty that startled even myself. "I don't know what to call it yet," I said slowly. "But every single morning, before I even open my front door, I look for her across that fence before I look at anything else in my life. If that's not an answer, I don't have a better one." Marcus studied my face for a long time. Something in his expression shifted, the way a man's shoulders drop when he finally decides the ground beneath him is solid. Then, for the first time, he offered me his hand. I took it. This time, it wasn't a test. It was acceptance. That same week, Claire's father collapsed in the kitchen. An ambulance ride, an overnight stay, machines beeping in a room that smelled like antiseptic and fear. I sat beside Claire in that hospital hallway for 6 hours straight, holding a paper cup of coffee neither of us drank, saying nothing, because there was nothing that needed saying. When her father finally opened his eyes and saw the two of us sitting there together, he reached for Claire's hand first, then mine, and held them both at the same time like he was tying a knot he'd been waiting months to finish. "I knew," he whispered, his voice rough from the tubes still taped to his face. "I knew from the first night at that barbecue you weren't really her boyfriend yet." He smiled weakly. "But I also knew you would become one. Some things just need a little time and a small push." Claire's hand tightened around mine, and for the first time since that first backyard, neither of us pulled away. He recovered slowly over the following months. Slower steps, shorter walks around the yard, but steady, present, alive. And somewhere in those months, without either of us marking the exact day it happened, Claire and I stopped performing entirely. We started dating for real, quietly. No announcements, no explanations to anyone who hadn't already been standing in that yard with us from the beginning. I stopped waiting for Saturday gifts on my porch, because now I just walked next door instead. She stopped leaving notes because now she said the words herself. The fence between our two yards is still there, But there's a gate in it now, one we built together on a Sunday afternoon with her father supervising from a lawn chair, calling out instructions he didn't really need to give. 1 year after that first barbecue, her family held another one. Same yard, same string lights, same smell of charcoal drifting into a soft summer sky. When Claire took my hand and walked me toward her father and said, "Daddy, this is my boyfriend," she didn't need to add another word. And this time, I didn't almost drop the plate in my hands. I held it steady, sure of exactly where I was standing and why. I used to believe that being quiet made me forgettable. My ex-wife believed it too. But Claire heard me anyway in the silence, in the small things left on a porch railing, in a fence that slowly turned into a gate. She introduced me as her boyfriend before I ever became one. But maybe she wasn't early. Maybe I was just late. So I want to ask you something, and I want you to really sit with it before you answer in the comments below. If someone you loved introduced you to their family as theirs, before you had ever said a single word about it out loud, would you correct them in front of everyone they love, or would you quietly decide to become exactly what they already believed you were?